A number of our listeners asked me to bring our next guest forward this week because they say, Charles Sasser is just an incredibly calming influence. And he has incredible insight, incredible experience. And he's actually kind of the, if you will, a political philosopher. And folks asked that I get Charles on the show today, and we do what we're asked to do. I'm honored to have back with me my friend Charles Sasser. He has been a full-time freelance writer, journalist, photographer since the late 70s. He is a veteran of both the United States Navy and the United States Army. With the Army, he was in Special Forces with the Green Beret. He was a combat veteran, a former combat correspondent who was wounded in action. He also served 14 years as a police officer in Miami, Florida, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he was a homicide detective. Charles has taught at universities, lectured nationwide, traveled extensively throughout the world. He has published he's incredibly prolific, 3,000 articles and short stories in magazines ranging from Guidepost, Parents, and Christian Life to Soldier of Fortune, True West, and Writer's Digest. He is author or co-author or contributing author of more than 50 books and novels. He has incredible number of recent books, even. The Crushing the Collective is one of my favorites. I am honored. Another one just coming out called Looneyville, and needless to say, we are in Looneyville. I'm honored to have back with me my friend Charles Sasser. Chuck, welcome back to Operation Freedom.
Yeah, thanks. I'm always glad to come.
So, Chuck, let's before we delve into a little historical perspective on how totalitarians kind of take over an operation, give us your take of what's transpired with the election starting on November 3rd, 2020, and continues to this day.
Well, the homicide detective, there's several things you have to have. The opportunity to commit a crime, the opportunity and the motivation, and the opportunity, of course, the opportunity. But those are two things, opportunity and motive. And I think we can see the motive operating here in the election fraud, and it is a fraud. If I was a homicide detective, if I were a detective again, hey, some people would be going to jail because that's how obvious it has become. But because of politics, we try to just skate around the edges here. Let's not get too involved. But I think Trump may get involved.
Oh, I do too. And Chuck, Joe Biden, I played this clip before, but it bears repeating because the Fox Newses of the world that are part of the deep state, they'll never play this clip. Derek, hit it. Joe Biden speaking a couple weeks before the election about, what kind of operation, what kind of organization they had going.
Secondly, we're in a situation where we have put together, and you guys did it for our administration, the President Obama's administration before this. We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics.
Well, what do you think? Your take, Charles.
Was that Joe Biden?
That was Joe Biden.
Oh, well, I should have known. Every time I hear Joe Biden, the name Joe Biden, or frankly, a bunch of these people, I think, Forrest Gump, the character he played in the movie Forrest Gump, stupid is as stupid does. And I think we got a problem here. What we have to understand is, I think we have to understand the history of this. This has been going on a long time, this socialism, this move towards socialism, to social democracy, or fascism. Fascism is just a branch. It branched off, actually, Russia. Hitler branched off Russia. And, of course, that is from Karl Marx. But if you look at history, this has been happening in the U.S. In 1825 was the first socialist commune or experiment we had in the U.S. New Harmony, Indiana, I think about 1825. And it's always interesting how that thing failed, and it failed like all the other attempts at socialism. None has ever succeeded. Since 1825, of course, was before Karl Marx, but since Karl Marx appeared on the scene, 40 countries have tried socialism or social democracy or, whatever you want to call it. They call it many different things to try to camouflage what it actually is. But 40 countries have tried. 40 countries have failed dismally. And like in Venezuela, you end up eating their neighbors' cats and their canaries. And it always happens every time.
Charles, one of the more concerning elements of this is fantastic attorney Sidney Powell, who I'm honored to call a friend of hers. Sidney went on record this past week, and she actually spoke about involvement of just a benevolent organization within our own government called the CIA, and how they're involved in this fraud to take over the country. Derek, play that clip for Charles. Let's have his input on this.
The tie-in is that there's no way these programs could have been run around the world to affect elections without the CIA. We also have had people disclose to us the whole Hammer program that was created for the CIA and Scorecard, which is essentially the same thing. It seems like every country has used something like this to do what it wants to do. Supposedly ours was invented to influence foreign elections, but that too could have been turned on this election. It's all part of the same part and parcel of government interference in elections to make choices against the will of the people. And the will of the people in this country was that Donald Trump win in a landslide. If we can get to the bottom of it, and I am determined to do that, I think we'll find he had at least 80 million votes. The only reason the glitches happened in the system was because he had so far many more votes than they had calculated in advance. Their algorithms wouldn't perform the functions they'd originally performed or were set to perform. They couldn't make up the vote count. He had gotten so many hundreds of thousands more than they planned. So that's when they had to stop the counting and come up with a way to backfill the votes or destroy votes for Trump while they fabricated votes for Biden.
Sidney Powell, who is a former federal prosecutor, by the way, spent 10 years working for the federal government.
That was Sidney earlier this week. Charles, your take?
I think she's exactly right. And I think when that Bill Barr is involved, now the Attorney General, I think there's going to be some indictments, maybe. Maybe. I always preface everything with a maybe when it comes to government because it's so infiltrated. It's like a rotted log with all the termites in it. And they just keep eating. There's nothing left of the log. And they eat in the same pattern. This pattern has been going on in the U.S. openly since early 60s, since 1960s. And, matter of fact, I've written 3 books on the subject, of course, and 2 of them are available, And so it's the same pattern, and I think that's saying that Ms. Powell understands that this is what is happening, and until we control the corruption in our own government within our administrations, which Trump has tried to look at all the people he's fired, and since he's been in office, trying to weed out the swamp. Well, the swamp, there's no saying that the swamp eats everything that comes in it. Well, it sure has eaten a lot of people in Washington, D.C., that swamp has. And Sidney's right, and I'm cheering her on. I'm cheering Bob Bowell on. I say, don't stop now. I mean, the other clowns, it took 4 years, almost 4 years, they were pursuing Donald Trump on entirely lies. They were lies. And trying to frame him. And look at what happened. They're some of them are still in Congress, and there's CIA. Some of them are still in their positions. Even after all that, they're still there. And still bloviating over television about, how Trump was illegal. But I think, we'd have to see. But I'm very skeptical. If anything comes of this, I don't care. You have to prove it. You have to prove it beyond reasonable doubt before you ever go to court with the situation it is today. And, it's not enough to have all these witnesses and statements and all this. It's not enough. Listen to these people. Everything, Trump is illegal. Trump say this, Trump this, Trump this. You asked one of them about Joe Biden or Hunter Biden, the first thing they do, well, Donald Trump talked to oh my gosh. Well, out at the off
He
Europe,
talked to he had a perfectly legal conversation with the president of Ukraine, right? I
Ukraine,
mean, you know,
absolutely Ukraine, and at the same time, Joe Biden was blackmailing him to get rid of the prosecutor.
Right.
I mean, the same period.
Well, let's not let the facts get in the way, Charles.
No. Never let a truth stand between you and a good story.
Yeah, Charles, in your books, you've talked about this cycle, and that we go into a cycle, if you will, for bondage, and in fact, you've spoken about a number of different aspects of the recipe for cycling back into bondage. Could you go through some of those steps that you've spoken about before, as far as the recipe for a society, if you will, devolving into a bondage situation? Because when you start talking about it, it really sounds like with what we've been experiencing for years in this country.
Oh, we have been experiencing it, and this same thing, this same cycle, by a guy named Titler. I can't remember exactly, early 1900s. He put together this cycle by which all societies rise and fall, and they start with actually with liberty, and then you go from bondage. Well, then there's real no bondage there, but to search for legitimate truth, and then you go from spiritual truth to great courage. Think our American Revolution. From great courage to liberty. Think the Constitution. Liberty to abundance. See how wealthy we've gotten through capitalism. And then complacency. Go from complacence, we get complacent. Well, this is just America, greatest country in the world. Yeah, to apathy. Apathy means, like so many of us do today, we just sit back and refuse to say anything. And I've said it once before, that they will succeed with socialism in this country. They are, and I'm pessimistic when it comes to that, because I think they're going to succeed sooner or later. And so we go from to complacency. We just say, okay, everything's going great. To apathy, we just let it go. Then apathy breeds dependence, and then dependence, you go back to bondage. And of course, we see this playing out. We see this playing out so many different ways in America today. That how these same points here are being manipulated, and they're being manipulated toward one point to bring about democratic socialism. Of course, that's not exactly what it is, but anyway, that's what we're saying. It is this democratic socialism. And they use what we're doing now to get in, and what you always do. People lose freedom. There are certain factors that those who oppose the idea of liberty, of smelly Walmart people, they go through, say they use the same tactics, fear. Now look, see how many of these, how we can see this playing out now with the global pandemic. We can see this playing out right now, and we can see division. We divide people on race, on gender. If you put people against each other, they're battling each other, and they forget and overlook what's really happening right under their eyes. This whole thing, stupid is as stupid does. Well, the stupid generally comes in, as it did in 1917 in Lenin's Russia. It comes in the form of those who go out in the streets and riot and burn things, who say, we the people are fed up, we don't like the way things are going. We want to create a new government. So use that fear that they're using now with the riots. Remember, they didn't even stop the riots because they were being effective in this thing. Okay, we start with the division. When we start with, we started with fear, and then we start with division. We divide on race, gender, and so forth. And then we start on envy. Got to do something with the wealthy. The wealthy's got too much money. Let's take it away from them. and go on. So, and then the hate built it. We didn't have any racism for a long time in America after the 60s. Racism had pretty much disappeared. And I know my partners were in Miami, Florida, where I worked the ghettos, salt and pepper team. My partner was black, and in the police department, you never even thought about black. You thought about human beings. They were cops. Everybody was blue. And then we get hate. We get power. And that comes from taking over. Like Mao Zedong called it, the long march through the institution, the Cultural Revolution. We've been undergoing this Cultural Revolution in America since the 1960s. Well, actually, you could even say maybe FDR might have been involved in that. But anyway, so we've been involved in this power. And first, you collect political power. That's one of the first things we must do. And then we go from there to courts to weaken America, take over the courts to weaken America. We go to press, take over the press. And we're not taking over the press. I mean, we become engines of propaganda. Then we go down and break down in morality. I mean, look around you. At this, one example, I think it's so bizarre. So, California school, and I think she was a school teacher, and her daughter's 3 years old, and they're saying, well, what we're going to do is let her choose her sex. She's going to be sex neutral until she chooses her sex, this kind of thing. And then, of course, you get some of the most bizarre. When I was a cop, I begin to see it. Then that's when I begin to take notes. You begin to see all this bizarre behavior where society is rotting down right around that, and a lot of it has to do with morality. So, anyway, we do that, and we infiltrate the press. We break down the cultural, and then we have once we have a socialist government, which is what we're going to have with Biden. Somebody asked me the other day, do I think Biden, once he's in office, will moderate? He's normally a moderate. And I said, the guy never was moderate. The guy just never had a thought of his own. That's what I think. Whoever comes along, he'll play ball with them. So I think that's exactly what he'll do. So will he? What happens? He's a mouthpiece. He's a puppet. Look hard, and you can see the hand up his butt, manipulating his mouth. What time he can get a good sentence out? So no, I don't, because I mean, can you imagine anybody more stupid as stupid does than AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? And people have voted for her, and they listen to her, and she's going to have a lot of influence in this new administration. I mean, this woman is stupid. I mean, I hate to say that, but I'd tell her personally she's stupid. And all you have to do is look at it. Then you got to dominate. You've got to dominate the psychiatric profession. Everybody disagrees with you; they're nuts. And then we got to discredit the family, which is look at the highest divorce rate in our history now. And then, of course, you discredit the family by men marrying men, women marrying the German shepherds in train stations. It's immorality at its level. You get the impression that it's that science, everything has to do with science for the transformation. Pardon me, I've this problem in my throat that comes from my eyes. But anyway, that you create the impression that everything is science. COVID-19, we're going to use the science. And then you get some of these characters on there that I think might make a platoon medic in an emergency. And yet they're creating this science around it. And then you've got insurrection of legitimate scale. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. The legitimate scale is insurrection. And with the Black Lives Matter and the fatwa and all these things and the things they're doing, and not even, and guess what? You see, they're not arresting anybody for it. They burn buildings and loot, shoot people. Are anybody's arrested? No, not arrested. Instead, they want to arrest a man and a woman. They charge a man and a woman who are defending their own house with a gun from these rioters. They arrest them, and one of the rioters just continued looting and burning. Why? Because they're like linen. I mean, the same pattern follows itself again and again. You know, you have the violence, you have the politics, and you use the people who are really stupid are the people who are rioting in the streets. They have no idea what they're rioting for.
That's right. They're just useless eaters, and they're just going to be taken down. But the first ones, and because, as you pointed out in your books, Charles, they're the ones who actually go first, at the hands of the people that they thought were their benefactors, when in fact they were just using them as useless eaters. Charles, folks, you can get more information on Charles' books at charlessasser.com, charlessasser.com.